There are a lot of survival tips that have been circulating as common knowledge for generations. These tend to be tips for extremely specific situations that the average person is almost certain to never encounter. But we all like to keep these tips in the back of our mind and share them with others in the unlikely event that they actually happen to one of us. However, since actually experiencing one of these situations tends to be extremely rare, there's actually no way for people to find out how many of these commonly held beliefs could actually get you killed until it's too late. Not only is this an inaccurate survival tip that is frequently repeated, but it's also a conclusion many people draw on their own because it just seems to make sense. If you're in an elevator and the cables break, it seems logical that the best thing to do would be to jump just before the elevator hits the ground. The idea is that doing this would cause the elevator to crash below you, and you would just land safely like you would from a normal stationary jump. While it really seems to make sense, this is actually a terrible idea for a number of reasons. Even if we assume this plan would work, how exactly are you going to know when to jump? You would need to know the elevator's exact starting height and velocity when it entered freefall, and you would also need to be able to calculate the time until impact in less than it took for the impact to happen. That's just not realistic. An elevator with a glass floor would solve the problem of being able to see when the crash was going to happen, but then you would have to survive not just the crash, but broken glass flying everywhere. It's also worth noting that jumping while both you and the elevator are in freefall wouldn't be the easiest thing to do. As far as your ability to effectively move around is concerned, you would essentially be like an astronaut floating in an elevator-sized spaceship. But let's ignore all of this and assume that you are able to jump normally and with perfect timing. So, would this help at all? Well, no, not even a little bit. The average person can jump upward from a standstill at about 5 kilometers an hour. That's well and good, but the speed is only relative to the surface off which you are jumping. If you jump at the speed from the floor of an elevator that is falling toward the ground at 60 kilometers an hour, you're still falling toward the ground at 55 kilometers an hour. Even worse, because the elevator is traveling down faster than you are, you'll wind up banging your head against the ceiling before then falling back to the ground at high speed. The better course of action is to lie on the floor of the elevator and spread out as best you can while protecting your head. This spreads the force of the impact across your body rather than landing and having all of the force imparted on your legs and knees, thus potentially lessening the damage. Elevators also have crumple zones that both absorb energy and slow down the collision, and the air in the shaft beneath the elevator would act as a giant airbag, slowing the elevator before the initial impact caused it to crumple. In the event you had jumped while this was happening, your body wouldn't receive any of the benefits of these safety features and would instead land back on the elevator floor at maximum speed. Of course, this is all extraordinarily unlikely to happen anyway. There are numerous failsafes put into place that make it effectively impossible for an elevator to ever freefall in the first place. There are multiple backup cables, making it beyond unlikely that they would all break at once, and the elevators also have large mechanical brakes that will automatically trigger if the elevator either starts to fall or loses electricity. If you were to suddenly find yourself stranded in the wilderness, everybody knows that your 3 primary concerns should be water, food, and shelter. Not everybody knows how to build a shelter that would adequately protect them from wind and rain, especially if they don't have any tools handy, so finding a shelter may be preferable to trying to build your own, especially if the rain has already started to come down. Caves make for great shelters that can protect us from the elements, and humans have been using them for as long as we have existed. That's not to say that the cartoon depictions of ancient humans living permanently in caves and carrying around big wooden clubs are accurate by any means. People were predominantly nomadic, and caves only provided temporary shelter. But if caves have made suitable shelters for the past couple million years worth of humans, then they should be good enough to keep you safe from the wind and rain for a few hours as well. And as a bonus, the cartoon depictions of bears hibernating in caves are also inaccurate, as bears rarely use caves to hibernate, so you're unlikely to be trespassing on any large animal's property. So, in the event that you find yourself taking refuge in a cave after getting caught in a storm, one of your first instincts would probably be to make a nice big fire to warm yourself up and dry off your clothes. Cavemen huddled around a fire is an image that has been ingrained in society for seemingly forever, but this could be a potentially fatal decision. One of the more obvious issues is all of the smoke that would be coming from the fire, which does contain carbon monoxide. The potential dangers of inhaling these pollutants can be easily mitigated by keeping any fire you build as close to the entrance of the cave as possible. But a fire deeper in the cave poses a real risk of death from smoke inhalation. To be fair, this part is probably obvious, and most people would realize not to build their fire deeper in a cave than necessary. However, the much less obvious threat comes from a fire's size. Depending on what type of rock the cave is made of, there are 2 possible ways that the increased heat can interact with it. Heat causes rocks to expand, and most rocks contain some amount of groundwater inside them, though in different amounts. The additional heat from a fire can cause this trapped water to expand, resulting in cracks or breaking. Whether it's from the rocks expanding or cracking, the potential result is the same: a fatal cave-in. If you do find yourself seeking shelter in a cave, and it is imperative that you create a fire either for warmth or to cook food, you will want to keep the fire close to the entrance, away from the walls, and as small as possible. Oh, and a large fire in a cave could also raise the temperature enough to wake hibernating cave dwellers like bats. While this is unlikely to prove fatal, it probably wouldn't be a fun surprise when it happened either. Continuing your previous scenario a bit, let's say that you were able to wait out the storm in a cave without being crushed to death by the ceiling. Unfortunately, you're still lost and alone, and now your stomach is starting to grumble. It's time to find something to eat. But what? There are a lot of different plants, nuts, and berries, many of which look similar. If you don't happen to be an expert, the commonly held belief is that you can observe what other animals eat to determine whether or not something is poisonous. And to be fair, this is certainly rooted in a combination of truth, common sense, and historical precedent. Early humans definitely observed other animals for clues as to what is safe to eat, and it's probably better than just randomly guessing. However, this is far from a perfect system, and you would not want to rely on cues from other animals exclusively. Even when observing other mammals which are very similar to humans, genetically, these animals' digestive systems may have adapted over time to handle toxins that would be lethal to humans. If you have access to clean water and have no idea what is or isn't safe to eat, your best bet would probably be to eat nothing. An average person can survive with water but no food for well over a month, so unless you believe you'll be stranded in the wilderness for that long, it would be better just to wait to be rescued or find your way home, rather than roll the dice on that brightly coloured mushroom that you saw a deer eat. For that matter, you'd probably just be safer trying to kill the deer or a rabbit for food rather than gambling on unidentified plants. But if you're going to be stranded in the wilderness long enough where starvation is a real threat and you're unable or unwilling to kill animals for survival, under no circumstances should you trust birds. Most birds are able to eat berries that are poisonous to humans, so if you have no choice but to follow the lead of other animals on what plants are safe, definitely don't copy the birds. This myth started widely circulating around the time of the Vietnam War, and for many medical professionals, it is one of the most infuriating myths out there. People told stories of combat medics using tampons to plug gunshot wounds, saving the lives of people with catastrophic injuries who would have otherwise died. There are even stories that tampons were invented for combat use in World War I before being adapted to their current feminine hygiene use. There are certainly a lot of stories and anecdotes, and it's true that many field medics do keep tampons in their kits. It's likely they've even occasionally been used in the field on occasion for small wounds, but there's no actual evidence to support the claim that tampons are effective at plugging bullet wounds. In fact, it's among the worst things you can possibly do. To start, tampons weren't invented for World War I. The earliest tampons date back to Egypt in the 5th century BC, so while the materials have changed, the idea is hardly new. However, the myth may have its origins in World War I, when some factories manufactured both tampons and combat gauze. The two items being manufactured side by side may have been conflated as them being interchangeable, but this is of course not the case. In the event of a serious wound like a gunshot, the most important goal is to stop the bleeding. And from that standpoint, tampons make a certain amount of sense. When you open a fresh tampon, it feels firm and compressed and is about the size of a bullet. They're also made to absorb blood and expand, so there's definitely a logical basis behind the myth. However, if a person is shot, the goal isn't to absorb blood, it's to stop the bleeding. Unless you can get the blood back inside them, absorbing it isn't actually going to help the person. The key to stopping bleeding is pressure, which tampons do not provide. Though tampons do expand when wet, they become soft rather than maintaining their initial firmness. Even with their expansion, they won't put adequate pressure on a severed artery. The whole idea also ignores cavitation of the wound. The entrance wounds may be the size of a bullet hole, but the force imparted on the flesh as the bullet passes through causes expansion of the wound that is invisible from the outside. The bullet may also have ricocheted off a bone rather than traveling in a straight line. Regardless of the path of the bullet, a tampon will never apply pressure nor pack the entire wound. It will instead leave a cavity for blood to pool, since tampons don't even absorb that much blood. They may work great for their intended use, but even a heavy flow tampon can only absorb about 12 milliliters of blood. That's a little more than 2 teaspoons, which is the equivalent of an average nosebleed. It would hardly be useful treating a life-threatening wound losing 1 to 1.5 liters of blood. While tampons have become a mainstay of survivalist first aid kits, you'd be much better off buying some hemostatic combat gauze like Quick Clot, or even just regular gauze for that matter. Of course, life can be unpredictable and you might not always always have a first aid kit handy, but if you need to improvise a solution, you'd be better off packing the wound with a cotton shirt than a tampon. This will fill the wound more completely and is less absorbent and malleable than a tampon, so it will be better at placing pressure on the severed arteries. Your shirt is obviously not sterile, so this does carry with it a risk of infection, but like we said earlier, stopping the bleeding is the most important goal. If it gets infected, there are antibiotics to deal with that later. Besides, while this may come as a surprise to many, tampons aren't actually manufactured sterile either. In 2011, a man in Sweden wound up trapped in his car in the snow for 2 months. It was an incredible survival story, and one of the factors attributed to his survival was that he ate snow as a way to stay hydrated. He was still extremely emaciated and barely alive by the time his car was dug out from the snow, since he had gone 2 months without food, but he survived and made a full recovery. Unfortunately, stories like these help perpetuate the myth that eating snow is an effective way to hydrate yourself in the winter if you're trapped without supplies. And again, this is a myth that seems to make perfect sense since snow is just crystallized water. However, not only could eating snow prove fatal, it will also ultimately dehydrate you rather than hydrate you. Although it does it in a more roundabout way. To start, we'll assume that you're using clean, undisturbed snow. It's still going to kill you, but for less obvious reasons than if it was snow filled with road salt and animal droppings. Despite essentially being just water, snow is a solid rather than a liquid. Your body needs to heat it up to convert it to water, and just to make it warmer in general, and this requires a large increase in energy consumption. Your body naturally loses water through breathing, sweating, and urinating. It's why we need to keep rehydrating ourselves. Increased energy consumption increases how much water the body expels, so while there is nothing in the snow itself that causes a person to dehydrate, the need for the body to heat the snow will make the person expel more water than they take in as a result of the process. This is also a highly inefficient process, since snow is basically just air. Different weather conditions can affect the ratio slightly, but 1 inch of rain is roughly the equivalent to 10 inches of snow. That means that if you were thirsty and wanted 1 cup of water to rehydrate your body, you would need to eat 10 cups of snow. Not only are you risking dehydration by expending so much energy trying to warm up the snow, but you're also risking hypothermia. Snow is cold, and your body only has so much energy that it can produce to warm you up. If you're filling your stomach with enough icy snow to hydrate yourself, then you're at serious risk of lowering your internal temperature enough to cause hypothermia. This should not be taken lightly, because if you're trapped in a situation where hydrating by eating snow seems like a viable solution to your problems, the air temperature is probably cold enough to eventually cause hypothermia by itself, even before you start packing your stomach full of snow. Of course, this problem potentially has a very easy solution. There isn't an issue with anything in the snow. The issue is simply that it's snow. If you can build a fire or have some other means by which to melt and warm up the snow, you can absolutely drink the resulting water to hydrate yourself without issue. As long as your body isn't the thing warming up the snow, you should be completely fine. Other than being trapped somewhere that made eating snow seem like a good idea.